Why would he be fixing it in the middle of the night, as stealthily as a thief? I pressed myself against the wall, trying not to breathe. I watched as Mike carefully removed the bottom panel of the stove, exposing a complex web of wires and electronic components. His hands, which I had always thought were only accustomed to shuffling papers at his sales director job, were now skillfully using a pair of small pliers to snip and strip several wires. A metallic glint caught the light copper wire. He was meticulously extracting the copper cores, coiling them into small bundles, and stuffing them into his pocket. My entire body went rigid. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My husband, the polished sales director who always wore expensive suits, was doing this, stealing copper wire from our own stove, to sell it for cash? The thought was absurd, laughable, but the scene unfolding before me was undeniable proof. This stove had been a housewarming gift from my mother. It was a high-end German import, and it hadn't been cheap. "A woman's hardest work is in the kitchen," my mom had said. "I want you to have the best to make it a little easier." And now my husband was destroying it, just to get a few coils of copper wire. How much could that possibly be worth? I don't know how long he was there. By the time he had carefully replaced the panel, wiped away any trace of his work, and tiptoed back toward the bedroom, I was still standing frozen behind the door. My thirst was gone, replaced by a profound, terrifying coldness and confusion. I silently returned to bed, pulled the covers over my head, and pretended to be fast asleep. Mike slipped back into bed beside me, his breathing still slightly ragged. I felt him turn to look at me, probably checking to see if I had noticed anything, but I kept my eyes squeezed shut, my breathing steady. That night, sleep was impossible. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind. Why would he do this? Was he that desperate for money? Why hadn't he said a word to me? After 8 years of marriage, I thought I knew this man. I was the primary breadwinner in our family. My salary was 5, maybe 7 times his. I handled all the major expenses, the mortgage, the car payments, our son's private school tuition, even the monthly allowance I sent to his mother. I had never let him want for anything, never complained. All I wanted was a peaceful home, a loving husband to share my life with. But what I got in return was a growing coldness, and now this frighteningly secretive act. Was the peaceful life I had worked so hard to build just a facade, hiding secrets I could never have imagined? What would I do in the morning? Confront him? Scream, cry, and demand an explanation? No, I thought. If I did that, he would just deny it, invent some excuse. I needed to know the truth behind this act. And then, a reckless plan began to form in my mind. Tomorrow morning, I wouldn't get up early. I would pretend to oversleep, forcing my perpetually critical and difficult mother-in-law, Eleanor, to go into the kitchen and make breakfast herself. And I wanted to see what would happen when she turned on the sabotage stove. The night felt longer than a century. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring into the thick darkness of the room, listening to Mike's steady breathing beside me. That sound, which I had heard for 8 years, now felt foreign and menacing. Every time he shifted, my heart leaped, my body tensing like a drawn bowstring. I was afraid he would discover I was awake, afraid his eyes would see through the panic I was hiding behind my closed lids. But no, he slept soundly, the peaceful sleep of a man with a clear conscience, or perhaps the sleep of an actor who had mastered his role. The first faint rays of dawn filtered through the blinds. I heard the familiar alarm from Mike's phone. He grumbled, stretched, and turned it off before turning to me. I quickly squeezed my eyes shut, regulating my breathing to feign deep sleep. He gently shook my shoulder. "Sarah, honey, time to get up and make breakfast. I'm going to be late for work." His voice was normal, the same casual tone as any other day. I didn't move, just mumbled something about being tired. Mike shook me a few more times. Seeing no response, he grumbled under his breath and got out of bed himself. I cracked my eyes open just enough to watch his back. He didn't go straight to the bathroom as he usually did. He paused at the bedroom door for a second, his eyes darting toward the kitchen before he walked away. It was just a fleeting glance, but it didn't escape me. He was nervous. He was checking. A current ran through me. My plan, the crazy, reckless decision born from last night's panic, now felt clearer and more necessary than ever. I had to do it. I couldn't live in this charade for another day. Lying in bed, I heard the shower running, then the sound of the closet door opening. I curled into a ball under the blankets, my hands clenched into fists. What was I doing? I was gambling with the safety of my own mother-in-law, even though she had never treated me with anything but disdain. A part of my conscience screamed at me to stop, to get up and warn her about the stove. But then, memories of 8 years as her daughter-in-law, 8 years of biting my tongue until it was numb, came flooding back. I remembered the day I gave birth to our son. My C-section scar was still fresh when Eleanor stood at my hospital room door, telling relatives in a scornful voice, "There she is. Thought my son married a successful city woman who'd give me a strong, healthy grandson. Turns out she's as fragile as a snail and needed a C-section." Those words, spoken when I was at my most vulnerable and in pain, were like a knife to the heart. Mike was standing right there. He just silently pulled his mother away. He didn't say a single word to defend me. I remembered our family dinners. Whenever I cooked a dish she liked, she'd say, "Well, at least her cooking skills make up for her other shortcomings." If a dish wasn't to her liking, she would slam her fork down on the table in front of everyone. A grown woman who can't even cook a decent meal. I don't know what your parents taught you. Each time, Mike would just pass me some food and whisper, "Just eat, Sarah. Mom's just old and fussy." He never once said, "Mom, please don't talk to my wife like that." Not once. His silence, his weakness over the years, had eroded all my love and respect for him. He made me a lonely warrior in my own marriage, fighting a battle against his mother's bitterness all by myself. And his actions last night were the final straw. He didn't just disrespect me, he was actively destroying our home, a home bought mostly with my hard-earned savings. He was making a fool of me. I had endured enough. For 8 years, I had lived like a shadow, trying to please everyone. But what did I get in return? My mother-in-law's contempt and my husband's betrayal. This time, I would not be silent. I didn't want to scream and argue. I just wanted the truth, the raw, unvarnished truth, to see how they would react when their perfect facade was ripped away. The decision was made. There was no turning back. Eleanor's familiar nagging voice wafted up from downstairs, cutting through my thoughts. "It's this late and she's still not down? This daughter-in-law is getting lazy from being too comfortable. Mike, you need to have a talk with your wife. I won't tolerate this kind of behavior." I heard Mike's mumbled reply. "She's probably just tired, Mom. I'll go check." But Eleanor's sharp voice cut him off. "Tired from what? She does nothing around here but lie around. You go to work. I'll handle it." I heard Mike's footsteps head for the front door, then the sound of his car starting and driving away. He was gone. He had left me and his mother with the deadly trap he himself had set. My whole body tensed. Every one of my senses was focused on the kitchen. I heard Eleanor open the refrigerator, the clatter of pots and pans. She was getting ready to make breakfast, probably the omelets she always made. The sound of chopping, of vegetables being washed under the tap, every sound was familiar, yet today it made my heart race. I lay perfectly still, my hands gripping the bedsheets, holding my breath. I heard her place a pan on the stove. Then came a short silence, the calm before the storm. I knew what she was doing. She was reaching for the control panel of the induction stove. I could picture her wrinkled finger about to press the power button. My own fingers trembled in unison. And then I heard it. A dry, cold click from the kitchen, the sound of the power button being pressed. Immediately after that dry click, time seemed to stand still. I held my breath, my body as rigid as a stone, waiting for something terrible to happen. 1 second, 2 seconds. The house remained unnervingly quiet. It was so silent I could hear the birds chirping outside the window and the frantic drumming of my own heart. Could I have been wrong? Maybe Mike's actions last night were harmless, something I had overanalyzed. Or perhaps the stove could still function despite a few missing copper wires. A faint glimmer of hope, mixed with a strange sense of disappointment, flickered within me. I had braced myself for a hurricane, but was it only a passing breeze? But then, just as I let out a breath, a deep, powerful pop echoed from the kitchen. The sound wasn't loud, but it was forceful enough to vibrate the floorboards. It was the sound of something under pressure suddenly bursting, and it was immediately followed by a piercing, blood-curdling scream that shattered the morning silence. Ah! That scream belonged to my mother-in-law. It wasn't her usual sharp, nagging tone. This was a cry of pure panic, pain, and absolute terror. My body shot up as if electrocuted. I threw off the covers and bolted from the bedroom like an arrow. All my plans, all my calculations, vanished. My first and only instinct was to run down and see what had happened to her. I flew down the stairs, nearly tripping, and was hit by a pungent, acrid smell, the smell of burning plastic. The kitchen, just moments ago a familiar space, was now filled with a thin, grayish haze. And then I saw her. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was sprawled on the floor next to the refrigerator. She lay on her back, her eyes wide and staring blankly at the ceiling. The frying pan was thrown to a corner, hot oil splattered across the floor. One of her cheeks was bright red, and her normally neat bun of hair was disheveled, a few strands singed. But the most horrifying sight was her right arm. The sleeve of her silk pajamas was burned through, revealing a large patch of raw, red, blistering skin. She wasn't moving. She just lay there, her mouth agape, as if still in shock. "Mom! Mom!" I screamed, rushing to her side. I knelt beside her, my hands and legs shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. My mind was completely blank. The induction stove, the epicenter of the disaster, was now deformed. The sleek, black glass surface was shattered in a spiderweb pattern. A small smoking hole had appeared in the center. There had clearly been a small explosion, a powerful electrical short. Just then, the front door burst open. Mike rushed in. He must have heard his mother's scream over the phone or returned for some reason. When he saw the scene in the kitchen, his face drained of all color. But what stunned me was his first reaction. It wasn't to run to his mother. He stood frozen at the doorway, his wide eyes glued to the destroyed stove. In his eyes, I didn't see the concern of a son for his mother, but the guilt, panic, and despair of a culprit caught in the act. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew this was the direct result of his actions last night. "Mike, what are you standing there for? Call 911, I shrieked, my voice cracking with fear. My words seemed to snap him out of his daze. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed. I turned back to my mother-in-law, trying to help her sit up, but she only moaned weakly. "Mom, can you hear me? How do you feel?" I asked frantically. She didn't answer, just made a few incoherent sounds, her eyes still fixed on nothing. I realized with a jolt that this shock had not only burned her body, but had also delivered a severe blow to the spirit of a woman who had always been so strong and proud. While we waited for the ambulance, I stood up and walked over to Mike. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked him straight in the eye, my gaze as cold and sharp as a scalpel. He avoided my eyes, staring at the floor. "Why?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Why did you do it?" He didn't answer, just mumbled, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't think it would be this bad." "You didn't mean to?" The rage I had suppressed for so long began to boil over. "You didn't think?" How could he say those words now? But I knew this wasn't the time. I had to stay calm, at least until we got Eleanor to the hospital. The wail of an ambulance siren grew closer. The commotion had attracted the attention of our curious neighbors. They began to gather outside our gate, whispering amongst themselves. The curtain on my family's play, the performance of a warm, happy family, had been torn, and it was beyond repair. And I knew this was only the beginning of a much larger tragedy. The screech of the ambulance tore through the quiet suburban street. Paramedics quickly loaded Eleanor onto a stretcher. Her face was still ashen, her arm bandaged temporarily. As they wheeled her out, I saw the neighbors clustered at the gate, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and pity, their whispers buzzing in the air. Good heavens, what happened at the Millers? I heard she was electrocuted, the stove exploded or something. She looks terrible. I stood there, hearing every word, a bitter taste in my mouth. The play about a model, respectable family that my mother-in-law had always so carefully orchestrated for the public was now irrevocably shattered. I was about to get into the ambulance with her, but Mike quickly stopped me. "You stay home," he said, his voice hurried. "Tidy up a bit, watch the house and our son. I can take Mom." He said it without looking me in the eye. I knew the real reason. He didn't want me to come. He was afraid I would say something at the hospital. He needed time to invent a story, a plausible explanation for this horrific accident. I didn't argue. I just nodded. "Drive safe then. Call me with any updates." My voice was strangely calm. My composure seemed to unnerve him even more. He gave me a searching look, then quickly climbed into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle sped away, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my home. I went back inside and locked the door, shutting out the prying eyes. The kitchen looked like a war zone, the acrid smell of burnt plastic still thick in the air. I quietly grabbed a mop and bucket and began to clean. I wiped up the spilled oil, gathered the broken pieces of the pan, and carefully picked up every shard of glass from the stovetop. My hands worked mechanically, but my mind was operating with a clarity and sharpness I hadn't felt in years. What had happened could not be undone, and now I was no longer a submissive wife. I was an investigator. I started with the stove. I carefully examined the point of the explosion. It was clearly an electrical short caused by external tampering. The copper wires Mike had stolen, what was their purpose? Were they grounding wires? I wasn't an expert, but I knew with absolute certainty that Mike's actions were the direct cause. He wasn't just a petty thief, he had almost become a murderer. Then a cold thought struck me. Why copper wire? If he really needed money, there were plenty of valuable things in our house. Why choose something so dangerous and worth so little? There had to be another motive. And then I remembered. I remembered the hushed words I'd overheard from Mike on the phone when he rushed back. It went wrong. The old woman got burned. I couldn't get the money. Get the money? Get money from where? What money? I immediately ran up to my mother-in-law's bedroom. She always locked it when she left, but in the chaos, she must have forgotten. I turned the handle. The door opened. I held my breath and stepped inside. A pang of guilt shot through me, but was quickly replaced by determination. I needed to find the truth. Her room was decorated in an old-fashioned style, with dark mahogany furniture. Everything was neat and tidy. I didn't know where to start. I opened her wardrobe, rummaged through drawers, just clothes and personal items. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on an old metal box, tucked under the bed. It was secured with a small padlock. I tried to pull it out. It was quite heavy. I searched everywhere for a key but found nothing. She must carry it with her. Just as I was about to give up, my eyes fell on the wall calendar. Today's date was circled in red pen. Beside it, a handwritten note, 10 a.m., Bank of America, cash out CD. My heart pounded. A certificate of deposit? Was this the money Mike was after? I knew my mother-in-law had savings. She often boasted to the neighbors that it was her retirement fund. But why was she cashing it out today of all days? And how did Mike know? The pieces began to connect in my mind. Mike sabotages the stove. My mother-in-law can't cook, so she has to go out for breakfast. And on her way, maybe an accident happens. A staged robbery to steal the certificate of deposit. Was that his plan? It was a cruel and sophisticated plot, but the unexpected explosion had ruined everything. As I was lost in thought, my phone vibrated. It was Mike. I took a deep breath, trying to make my voice sound normal before answering. "Hello? How's Mom?" "She's okay." Mike's voice sounded tired but calmer. "The doctor said it's just first-degree burns and shock. She'll have to stay for a few days for observation. How are things at home? Did you finish cleaning?" "Almost done," I replied. "Good. Oh, and Sarah." He hesitated for a moment. "I'll probably have to stay at the hospital to look after Mom for the next few days. Can you handle things at home and with our son?" "Yes, I know," I said, my heart as cold as ice. Even now, he was still acting, still trying to push me away from the situation. The call ended. I sank onto the cold floor. Everything was worse than I had imagined. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, was not just a cheat, not just a liar, but a man who would conspire to harm his own mother for her money. And my mother-in-law, the woman who had treated me with such cruelty for years, was now a victim. A wave of disgust and outrage washed over me. I couldn't let this go. I had to do something. I had to find evidence, to expose his true face. And then I remembered something. Mike's old phone. He had gotten a new one last week, and the old one was still in his desk drawer. Could there be any traces left on it? A glimmer of hope. I knew what I had to do next. That flicker of hope spurred me into action. I hurried to the study, the small room we shared, a place that held so many memories from our early days of marriage. But now, it was just the scene of a crime waiting to be uncovered. I pulled open Mike's desk drawer, where he kept miscellaneous items. The old phone lay in a corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. My heart beat faster as I picked it up. Had he been careful enough to wipe all the data before tossing it in here? I pressed and held the power button. The screen remained black. The battery was dead. I scrambled to find a charger. Luckily, Mike was a pack rat. The old charger was still coiled in a small box. I plugged it in, and the screen lit up, showing the charging battery icon. A breathtaking sense of anticipation washed over me. A few minutes later, when the phone had enough power, I turned it on. Please enter passcode. It felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped on me. A passcode? I had never asked for his passcode. Respecting each other's privacy was something we had always agreed on, but now, that privacy was a fortress wall blocking me from the truth. I sat motionless, staring at the screen. I could try the usual numbers: his birthday, my birthday, our anniversary. But too many wrong attempts could lock the phone permanently. I bit my lip, trying to rack my brain for any other significant number. And then, a faint memory surfaced. An evening a few years ago, Mike had gotten drunk. He'd pulled out his wallet and showed me a faded old photograph of a girl with a bright smile and long hair in pigtails. He'd said she was his first love. And he'd mumbled a string of numbers. May 17th, 98. The first time we held hands. At the time, I had just laughed it off as drunken nonsense. But now, that number appeared in my mind with perfect clarity. Trembling, I typed the digits onto the screen. 051798. Click. The home screen appeared. It worked. My heart felt like it would leap out of my chest, but the joy of victory was quickly replaced by a sharp pang of pain. My husband's phone passcode wasn't our anniversary, but the anniversary of a long-lost love he apparently cherished more. I pushed the pain aside and focused on my goal. I went straight to his messages, his social media apps, his call history. Just as I feared, Mike had been meticulous. There were no suspicious messages, no questionable calls. He had wiped it clean. I was close to despair. Was this my only clue, leading to a dead end? I sat there, dejectedly scrolling through the apps. Then my eyes landed on a folder labeled Archive, a folder most users rarely check. I tapped on it, and my heart clenched once more. Inside was a hidden photo album, hundreds of pictures, not of me, not of our son, but of a beautiful young woman, probably in her early 20s. She had a dazzling smile, sparkling eyes, and a stunning figure. There were pictures of her in a bikini on a beach, in an evening gown at a fancy restaurant, and most painfully, pictures of her with Mike. They were hugging, kissing. The way Mike looked at her was filled with an adoration I hadn't seen in his eyes for a very long time. Tears blurred my vision. So he wasn't just deceiving me, he was having an affair. How long had this been going on? I scrolled to the last photo and checked the date. 3 days ago, just before the accident. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. While I was at home, working myself to the bone for our family, he was out with his mistress. Anger and pain made me want to smash the phone. But reason held me back. Crying wouldn't solve anything. I had to keep looking. There had to be another clue. I went back to the messages. This time, instead of the inbox, I checked the drafts folder. And there it was. A message, fully typed out but never sent. He must have forgotten to delete it. Jessica. Plan changed slightly. The old woman got burned. She's in the hospital now. Might take a few more days to make a move. You just sit tight and wait for me. Everything's still under control. I'll get the money soon. Jessica. My heart shattered. I remembered the receipt for a designer handbag I'd found in Mike's wallet. The recipient's name was also Jessica. So his mistress's name was Jessica. And she knew. She knew everything about the plan to harm my mother-in-law. She was an accomplice. This wasn't just a fling. This was a calculated conspiracy between my husband and his mistress. They had plotted together to steal my mother-in-law's money. And perhaps, after they got it, they planned to run away together, leaving me with a broken family and a hospitalized mother-in-law. The pain in my chest was no longer the ache of betrayed love. It was a deep, visceral disgust at their cruelty and inhumanity. I tremblingly used my own phone to take pictures of all the photos and the draft message. This was irrefutable evidence. But as I was about to turn off the old phone, a short audio file in a notes folder caught my eye. The file was simply named Mom. I hesitated, then pressed play. My mother-in-law's familiar voice came through, but what she said made me freeze in utter shock. My trembling finger paused over the audio file named Mom. A dark premonition, cold and sharp, spread through me. Why would Mike record a conversation with his own mother? Was he protecting himself from her, or was this evidence he was preparing for something else? Questions swirled, but the desperate need to know the whole truth overpowered everything. I took a deep breath, tried to calm my racing heart, and pressed play. The recording was short, just over 2 minutes, but every second felt like a sledgehammer blow to my soul. The initial sound was staticky, mixed with the noise of a TV in the background. But then, Eleanor's voice came through, sharp, clear, and full of calculation, a world away from the pitiful victim I had seen just hours ago. "Are you sure this will work? What if it doesn't just short out? What if it explodes? What if something serious happens to me?" Mike's voice replied, a bit hesitant. "Mom, relax." I looked it up. "I'm only removing the grounding wire. It will just cause a localized short, create a spark big enough to make you jump back and fall. At worst, a minor burn. It's definitely not life-threatening. You just have to be convincing. Scream loud, act like you're in agony. Acting is the easy part. But what if Sarah suspects something? She's not an idiot. She won't suspect a thing, Mom. She loves me. She trusts me. Besides, think about it. You'll be in the hospital for a few days, and I'll have the perfect excuse to hold on to your savings bond. I'll tell her you asked me to keep it safe to pay for the hospital bills. Then I'll find a way to cash it. Once it's done, I'll split it with you. We'll both have money to pay off our debts and some capital to invest. It's a win-win." "And what about that Jessica girl? What's your plan for her?" Mike's voice softened considerably. "Don't worry about her, Mom. Once I have the money, I'll give her the life she deserves. She's sacrificed a lot for me." "All right, fine. We'll do it your way. But be careful. And delete this recording as soon as we're done. Leave no traces." The recording ended with a dry click, but in my ears, their words echoed, drilling into every corner of my mind, crushing what little was left of my world. I was shaking uncontrollably, not from fear, but from a rage and disgust so profound it was sickening. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor. But I felt nothing. My entire world had just collapsed. So that was it. It was all an act. A play, staged by my husband and my mother-in-law. She wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice, a co-conspirator. The explosion, the burn, the blood-curdling scream, it was all part of their plan. They had staged a tragedy to deceive me, to steal her own retirement savings. And in their play, I was cast as the foolish audience, the dutiful caretaker, worrying sick over the very people who were plotting against me. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, all of it merged into a tidal wave that drowned me. I thought I had hit rock bottom when I discovered Mike's affair. But no, this truth was 100, 1,000 times more cruel. They hadn't just lied to me. They were willing to risk their own lives to carry out their scheme. My mother-in-law, the woman I had tried so hard to respect, was so heartless she would injure herself for money, and my husband was even more monstrous. He didn't just betray his wife. He gambled with the safety of his own mother. I collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down my face. But this time, I wasn't crying from heartbreak. I was crying for my own stupidity. Who had I been living with for 8 years? What kind of monsters had I loved and sacrificed for? They were a team, an alliance built on deceit and calculation, and I, from the very beginning, had been an outsider, the fat lamb they had targeted for the slaughter. The ringtone from Mike's old phone shattered my chaotic thoughts. The screen lit up with 2 words, Jessica calling. She was calling. I stared at the phone, and a crazy, bold idea flashed in my mind. Trembling, I picked it up, took a deep breath, and swiped to answer the call. I wouldn't say a word. I just wanted to listen. I wanted to know what other horrific secrets were being hidden among these conspirators. And I never expected that this decision would open another door, leading me to a truth even more shocking. A truth that would change my life forever. My hand trembled as I swiped to answer the call. The room was silent except for the frantic drumming of my heart and the sound of my own ragged breath. I pressed the phone to my ear, forcing myself to remain completely still. Silence was my only weapon. Mike? Hello? Why did it take you so long to answer? Jessica's coquettish, slightly whiny voice came through the line. She didn't seem to notice the unusual silence. I've been calling and calling. I was worried sick. Is everything okay? Is your mom all right? Our plan wasn't exposed, was it? I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood to keep from sobbing. Our plan. So she wasn't just aware of it, she was a part of it. When there was no response, Jessica's voice grew anxious. Mike? What's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Did your wife find something out? I told you, you have to be careful with everything you do. If this falls through, we're both finished. If this falls through. That phrase stopped me. This wasn't just about stealing my mother-in-law's savings. There was something else. A bigger, more important goal that, if they failed, would have severe consequences. Mike, say something! Jessica's voice was now tinged with irritation. Fine, you won't talk, so I will. I just got the news. The contract over there is finalized. We just need your mom's money and the money you're getting from your wife, and we can make the down payment on that golden plot of land in the Northgate development. You have to hurry. They won't wait for us forever. This is our chance to change our lives, Mike. Both of our lives. A golden plot of land, Northgate, a contract, a chance to change their lives. The scattered pieces of information began to form a larger, more terrifying picture. Their scheme wasn't just about paying off gambling debts or stealing a few $1,000s in savings. They were aiming for a massive business deal, one that could bring in a fortune. And the capital for that deal was supposed to come from my mother-in-law, and from me. Oh, and one more thing, Jessica continued, her voice suddenly conspiratorial and gleeful. I heard some juicy gossip. That piece of land your wife's parents gave her as a wedding gift? You know the one? It's not just some ordinary farmland. I heard that whole area is about to be rezoned as a luxury ecological community. The land value is going to skyrocket, maybe 100 times over. That stupid woman really lucked out. I felt as if I had been struck by lightning. The inherited land. It was a nearly 2.5-acre property on the outskirts of the city that my parents had saved their entire lives to buy for me in case I ever wanted to move back and start a small farm. I had never told Mike about its full potential. How did she know? And how did she know about the rezoning? That was insider information, not something just anyone would have access to. Are you listening to me? Jessica's voice cut through my chaotic thoughts. We can't let a prize like that slip away. After you get your mom's money, you have to find a way to trick your wife into signing the deed over. Just tell her you need the money to save your business from bankruptcy. She'll definitely agree. She's blindly in love with you. Once we have that money, we won't have to worry about anything ever again. You'll leave her, and we can finally be together, go wherever we want. I couldn't listen anymore. I quietly ended the call. My hands were cold and clammy, sweat beading on my forehead. The truth was horrifyingly clear. I wasn't the only target. My mother-in-law was just a pawn. Their ultimate goal was my inherited land, my entire net worth. The bankruptcy scheme, the plot to harm his own mother, they were all cruelly calculated, steps to back me into a corner, to make me willingly hand over everything to them. An all-consuming rage surged within me. It was no longer the pain of a betrayed wife, but the fury of a cornered animal ready to fight back. They had underestimated me. They thought I was a naive little lamb, easily led to the slaughter. But they didn't know that their own cruelty had awakened a different person inside me, a person who would no longer cry, who would no longer endure. I stood up and wiped my tears. The weakness and panic were gone, replaced by a terrifying calm. I reviewed the evidence I had. The handbag receipt, the draft message on the phone, the recording of Mike and his mother, and now, the entire monstrous conspiracy I had just overheard. It was more than enough. I took Mike's old phone, connected it to my laptop, and copied all the data. Then I wiped my tracks, placing the phone back in the drawer exactly where I had found it, as if it had never been touched. This play was no longer theirs to direct. From this moment on, I would be the one writing the script. I would use their own greed to set a bigger trap. A trap that would bury them all. And I knew where I had to start. I needed an ally, someone they would never suspect. But how could I approach that person without being discovered? A bold idea came to me. I had to go to the hospital, but not as a daughter-in-law. I would go in a completely different disguise. The next morning, I was awake before my alarm. I had barely slept, my mind racing with the plan I had conceived. It was an incredibly risky move, a gamble where if I won, I could turn the entire game around, but if I lost, I could lose everything. I had no other choice. To remain silent was to wait for them to devour me. I didn't call Mike to check on his mother. I wanted him to get antsy, to go to the hospital himself, and I didn't go to the hospital looking like a dutiful daughter-in-law. Instead, I dug through my closet and chose an outfit I hadn't worn in years, a simple white blouse, black pants, and a pair of non-prescription, thin-framed glasses. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun and applied minimal makeup, just enough to hide my exhaustion and create a sharp, professional look. Looking in the mirror, I was no longer Sarah, the long-suffering housewife. I was someone else entirely, a confident and professional financial consultant. I arrived at the hospital but didn't go up to Eleanor's room. Instead, I went to the administrative floor, where they handled billing and paperwork. I paced the hallway outside the billing office, pretending to wait for someone, but I was actually watching. I knew that sooner or later, Mike would show up here. He needed to know the exact cost of his mother's care to calculate the next steps in their plan. Sure enough, less than half an hour later, I saw Mike hurrying down the hall. He looked tired and irritable, probably from a sleepless night worrying about his derailed scheme. He went straight into the billing office. I waited a moment, then followed, keeping a safe distance. I overheard his conversation with the clerk. "Excuse me, I'd like to inquire about the bill for patient Eleanor Miller in room 302. The clerk typed on her computer. "Yes, as of this morning, Mrs. Miller's total bill is just over $3,000. The initial $500 deposit has been applied, so the outstanding balance is about $2,500. $3,000 already?" I could hear the frustration in Mike's voice. He probably hadn't expected the minor burn he'd planned for to be so expensive. He muttered something under his breath and turned to leave. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and walked forward quickly, intentionally bumping into him. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, pretending to drop the folder I was carrying. Mike reflexively bent down to help me pick it up. When he looked up and our eyes met, he froze for a second, his face a mask of surprise and confusion. "Sarah, what are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" I smiled a polite, professional smile. "I'm sorry. You must have me mistaken for someone else. My name isn't Sarah." My tone was that of a complete stranger. Mike was stunned. He stared at me, from my bun to my glasses to my business attire. "No way. You're Sarah." Before he could say more, I took the folder from his hand, gave him a curt nod, and walked away, leaving him standing bewildered in the middle of the hallway. I knew my act had worked. My unexpected appearance and strange demeanor had planted a seed of extreme confusion in his mind. I didn't go back to the billing office. I went straight to the elevator and up to the 5th floor, where the hospital's cafe was located. I chose a table by a large window overlooking the hallway below. I ordered a coffee, opened my laptop, and pretended to work. I knew Mike wouldn't let it go. He would look for me. As expected, about 10 minutes later, Mike appeared on the 5th floor landing. He paced back and forth, his eyes scanning the area, clearly searching for me. When he saw me in the cafe, he didn't come in right away. He stood watching from a distance, a thoughtful frown on his face. I remained calm, my eyes fixed on my screen. After a moment, he took a breath, adjusted his collar, and walked in. "Excuse me. I'm sorry to bother you, but you look exactly like my wife," he said, standing at my table, his voice hesitant. I looked up at him over my glasses, offering another professional smile. "Is that so? It must just be a coincidence. Your wife must be a very beautiful woman." My compliment seemed to fluster him. He scratched his head. Yes, but it's not just a resemblance, it's identical, even the small mole right here under your left eye." He unconsciously raised a hand to point. I paused for a fraction of a second. I hadn't accounted for that detail, but I quickly recovered. What a fascinating coincidence. "Would you like to sit down?" I gestured to the chair opposite me. Mike hesitated, then sat, his eyes still filled with disbelief. "May I ask your name and what you do? Sorry if I'm being too nosy." "My name is Grace," I said, using the alias I had prepared. "I'm a risk assessment analyst for an investment firm. I'm here to meet a client." Investment firm. Those two words struck a nerve. His interest was immediately piqued. "So, your work must involve a lot of real estate projects then?" I took a sip of coffee and smiled enigmatically. "You could say that. We specialize in identifying promising investment opportunities, particularly land that's about to be rezoned." My words were like an arrow straight to his greedy heart. I saw the unmistakable glint of excitement in his eyes. The bait was taken. I had my fish on the line. And I had no idea that in the brief conversation that followed, he would not only reveal the depths of his greed, but also accidentally expose another secret, a secret about the very person I needed to find. Mike's eyes lit up with an undisguisable gleam when he heard the word rezoned. He leaned forward, his voice suddenly eager and intimate, all his initial confusion forgotten. "Really, Miss Grace? By any chance, is your firm interested in the Northgate area? I happen to have some inside information about a major project that's about to be launched there." I raised an eyebrow, feigning professional interest while maintaining my distance. "Oh? Inside information can be very valuable. But as you know, in my industry, all information must be verified by credible sources." My words were both an encouragement and a challenge. I wanted to see how far he would go to win the trust of Grace, the investment analyst. Mike immediately took the bait. He pulled a business card from his wallet and placed it on the table with a flourish. "Of course. I'm Mike Miller, sales director at Apex Properties. My source is completely reliable. In fact, the person who provides me with the information is a high-ranking official on the city's Urban Projects Committee," he bragged, trying to establish his influence and connections. My heart grew cold. He wasn't just a gambler, an adulterer, and a terrible son. He was also a braggart, willing to use any means to achieve his goals. But what caught my attention was the name he was about to drop. "Let me be frank with you, Miss Grace," he lowered his voice, leaning closer. "My close associate, Mark, is the one with direct access to the detailed zoning maps for that entire area. All the information he provides is top secret. We're currently looking for partners to invest in a few prime lots there. If you're interested, I could arrange a meeting for the three of us." Mark. The name made me pause. I tried to search my memory. I had heard that name somewhere before, in a very familiar context. And then I remembered it was the name mentioned in the recording between Mike and his mother. Mark said, "We have to be careful. If this gets out, both he and I are finished." I had overlooked that detail, assuming it was just one of Mike's gambling buddies. But no, it turned out Mark was a key player, a man with a title and authority, and an accomplice in Mike's scheme. I managed to hide my shock, smiling skillfully. This Mark sounds like a very capable person. "But Mr. Miller, I have principles. Before any meeting, I need some basic information for preliminary assessment. Can you tell me more about the land you're targeting? Location, size, and most importantly, what is its current legal status?" My question seemed to hit a weak spot. Mike faltered. Well, about that. The land is currently under someone else's name, but don't worry, we're in the process of negotiating the purchase. As soon as we have the capital, it will all be settled." "Under someone else's name?" I feigned skepticism. "That's too risky. My firm never invests in projects with unclear legal titles." Unless the person whose name is on the deed is completely under your control. Mike latched onto my words like a lifeline, nodding vigorously. Yes, you're absolutely right, Miss Grace. That person is completely under my control. I can guarantee, 100%, that if I want her to, she will sign the papers immediately. He said it with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her? I raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. It's a woman? Yes, Mike smirked, a smirk filled with a contempt I could feel in my bones. It's just my wife. My entire body went rigid. Even though I was prepared, I never thought he could say those words so casually, so cruelly. In his eyes, I, the woman who had spent 8 years with him, was just a tool, a her who was completely under his control. A knot of rage tightened in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't show my emotions now. I needed more. Is that so? I smiled coolly. You seem very confident in your ability to persuade your wife. It's not about persuasion, he sneered. It's about arrangement. Everything has been arranged. She'll soon be begging me to sell that land. Just then, Mike's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and quickly stood up. Excuse me, Miss Grace, I have to take this important call. I'll just step outside for a moment. He walked out onto the cafe's balcony to take the call, forgetting that the glass door was not soundproof. And through the clear glass, I not only heard his voice but also saw a woman walk up and link her arm through his intimately. My heart stopped. It was Jessica. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man I never would have expected to see. A man whose presence here, at this moment, completely upended every theory I had. Through the large glass window of the cafe, I watched, completely stunned. Jessica, in a form-fitting sea-green dress, clung to Mike's arm possessively. They looked like a perfect couple enjoying a beautiful morning, not co-conspirators in a dirty plot. But it wasn't Jessica who shocked me. It was the man with her. Tall, with carefully coiffed salt and pepper hair, a sharp gray suit, and a radiant smile. I recognized him instantly. It was Uncle David, my own mother's younger brother. My world tilted on its axis. Uncle David, the uncle I had always respected, who had been a father figure to me since I was a child. The man who would always ruffle my hair and say, "My favorite niece deserves all the happiness in the world." Why was he here? Why was he with Mike and his mistress? 1,000 questions cycloned through my mind. I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw Mike turn and say something to Uncle David with a deferential expression. My uncle nodded, the same kind, warm smile on his face. But now, that smile looked sinister and fake. They whispered together for a moment. Jessica occasionally rested her head on Mike's shoulder, while Uncle David patted Mike's back like a father, encouraging his son-in-law. They looked like a happy family, a family in which I was the odd one out. As the initial shock subsided, a horrifying truth began to dawn on me. The rezoning, the insider information Mike and Jessica had about my land. Uncle David worked for the City Planning Commission. Could it be? Could he be the one who leaked the information? Could the uncle I trusted most be conspiring with my husband to harm his own niece? The thought was more painful than Mike's betrayal. Mike was a stranger I had married, but Uncle David was my blood. I sat motionless, feeling as if all my strength had been drained. The coffee on my table was long, cold. I wanted to stand up, rush out there, confront them, scream in their faces, but I couldn't. I knew if I revealed myself now, everything would fall apart. They would deny it, and I would have no proof. I had to stay calm. Even with my heart bleeding, my mind had to remain cold. Their conversation didn't last long. After Mike handed my uncle a thick envelope, Uncle David patted his shoulder one last time and left with Jessica. Mike stood there watching them go, a triumphant smile on his face. He walked back into the cafe, looking as pleased as if he'd won the lottery. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Miss Grace," he said, sitting down, his voice brimming with excitement. "Just some family business. You know how it is with the elders, always calling to give some advice." Family business, elders. Every word he spoke was like a needle in my ear. I forced a professional smile. "It's no problem. You seem to have very good connections, Mr. Miller, both in business and in your family." "Oh, it's nothing." he said with false modesty. It's just about knowing how to treat people right, showing respect. Treating people right? I almost burst out laughing. He had redefined the meaning of the phrase in the most shameless way possible. I decided to make one final probe. Mr. Miller, I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, the Mr. Mark you mentioned earlier? Is he by any chance Mark from the Urban Projects Committee? Mike froze for a second, surprised that Grace would know such a detail. He stammered, yes. How did you know? I have a few friends in the industry, I replied vaguely. It's a small world. But I've heard that Mr. Mark is a very cautious man, not one to easily share confidential information. My words clearly had an effect. Beads of sweat appeared on Mike's forehead. He was afraid I would doubt his source, afraid of losing a potential partner. He quickly waved his hand. No, you don't have to worry about that, Miss Grace. Besides Mark, I have someone else, someone much closer, much more reliable. This person is absolutely foolproof. Oh? I raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. Mike leaned in close, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. It's my wife's uncle. He's even higher up than Mark. Every zoning plan for this entire city has to cross his desk. With his backing, what is there to worry about? My wife's uncle. My uncle. So I was right. A chill ran down my spine, but a smile remained on my lips. The smile of a hunter who had just watched her prey walk right into the trap. I had what I needed. I finally knew who the real traitor behind it all was. Now that you say that, I feel much more at ease, I said, standing up and extending my hand. Thank you for the conversation today, Mr. Miller. I will report back to my superiors. I'll be in touch. Yes, I look forward to working with you, Miss Grace. Mike scrambled to his feet, grabbing my hand with both of his. His palms were damp with sweat. I pulled my hand back, nodded, and turned to leave. I didn't head for the elevator. I walked toward the restroom. I needed a place to hide. The moment the restroom door closed behind me, my knees gave out and I slumped to the floor. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had succeeded. I had gotten the information, but the price was a truth too cruel to bear. My greatest enemy was the family member I had always loved and respected. And I knew this fight wouldn't end with a divorce. It would be a painful confrontation with my own family. But there was one thing I still didn't understand. Why was Uncle David doing all this? Was it just for money? Or was there another, deeper reason? A reason that, perhaps, only one person could know. I left the hospital in a daze. The sky outside was still a brilliant blue, the sun was shining, but my world had crumbled to dust. Mike's betrayal was now just a scratch compared to the knife. My own uncle, David, had plunged into my heart. I didn't go home. I couldn't face Mike. I didn't go to work. I just drove aimlessly through the city's crowded streets. The image of Uncle David smiling as he patted Mike's back, the image of him accepting that thick envelope, played over and over in my mind like a horror film. Why? The question bored into my soul, a raw and persistent ache. Uncle David wasn't poor. He was a respected city official with a comfortable life. My mother, his older sister, had always looked out for him. Why would he do this? Betray his own niece to conspire with a con man? It couldn't just be for money. There had to be a deeper reason, some old grudge I never knew about. And then a name surfaced in my thoughts. Mom. Only my mother could give me the answer. She and Uncle David were the only two siblings left. They had grown up together in hardship. Their relationship, at least in my eyes, had always been close. If there was a secret, she would surely know it. I turned the car around and drove straight to my parents' house, a small home tucked away on a quiet street. The moment my mother saw me walk in, looking like a ghost, she rushed over. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look so pale." I said nothing. I just wrapped my arms around her and broke down. This time, I wasn't crying out of anger or bitterness. I was crying because I felt lost and utterly alone, as if the entire world I had trusted was turning against me. My mother let me cry, quietly patting my back. Her warm hand was like a balm, slowly calming the storm inside me. When I had finally composed myself, she led me to a chair and brought me a glass of warm water. "Now, tell me what happened." I recounted the entire meeting at the hospital, my grace persona, and the climactic appearance of Uncle David. My voice trembled as I spoke. When I told her the truth that it was Uncle David who had leaked the zoning information and was backing Mike's scheme, I saw the color drain from her face. She froze, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain. "No, that's impossible," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It can't be David. He wouldn't do that to you." "But it's the truth, Mom," I said, my voice laced with bitterness. "I saw it with my own eyes. I heard it with my own ears. He took money from Mike. He plotted with them to steal my land." My mother sat in silence, her eyes staring into the distance, lost in some far-off memory. After a long moment, she let out a heavy, weary sigh. "I was wrong," she said softly. "I was wrong to think that time could heal all wounds." "Heal all wounds? What do you mean, Mom?" I asked, sensing I was on the verge of uncovering a devastating secret. She looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. "Sarah, there are things I've hidden from you for years. I didn't want to burden you with the grudges of the older generation, but perhaps it's time you knew the truth." And then she began to tell a story about the past, about her and Uncle David's youth, about an event that happened over 30 years ago, an event that became an unhealable scar on her heart and was, perhaps, the root of today's tragedy. "A long time ago, before I met your father," she began, her voice distant, "our family was very poor. I was the eldest, and I had to drop out of school to work and help support my younger siblings. The one I cared for the most, the one I sacrificed everything for, was your Uncle David." She told me that Uncle David had been a brilliant student, the great hope of the family. She had worked tirelessly, saving every penny so he could get an education and have a bright future. Her only dream was to see her brother succeed. But then, tragedy struck. Her voice grew heavy. "That year, I had managed to save up a significant amount of money. I planned to use it for David's college applications and his first few years in the city. But then, your grandfather fell gravely ill. He needed a massive sum for emergency surgery. I didn't hesitate for a second. I used all of my savings to save my father's life." "That was the right thing to do, Mom," I said. "Yes, it was for me, but not for your uncle," she said, wiping away a tear. "He couldn't get into the university he had dreamed of. He had to settle for a cheaper local college. He believed I had stolen his future from him. He told me he would never, ever forget that debt. I thought, after all these years, after we had grown up and built our own lives, that he had forgotten. I never imagined that resentment was still simmering, and that he would now take it out on you, my child." I sat in stunned silence. A story from the past, a misunderstanding, an invisible debt. It had all become a time bomb, and it was now blowing my life apart. So Uncle David wasn't just after money. He was getting revenge. He was hurting my mother through the daughter she loved most. And Mike was just a tool, a perfect pawn in my uncle's game of vengeance. But was it really that simple? Could a 30-year-old grudge, just over a missed university opportunity, really be enough to turn a man into a monster? Or was there another truth hidden behind it, a secret that even my own mother didn't know? My mother's story cast a thick fog over everything. I sat with her, trying to piece it all together. A 30-year-old grudge, an uncle willing to sacrifice his niece, and a husband who was a pawn in someone else's game. It sounded plausible, but deep down, something felt wrong. Was resentment over a lost educational opportunity really a strong enough motive to orchestrate such a cruel, complex scheme? Or was this just the tip of the iceberg? "Mom," I said gently, pulling her from her painful memories. "After Grandpa's surgery, how did Uncle David react?" My mother sighed. "He didn't speak to me for a full year. Later, after I met your father and our life improved, I still tried to make it up to him. I helped him get a stable job, helped him get married. I thought everything was in the past. I never knew." The guilt in her voice was heartbreaking. She had lived with this burden for decades. "It's not your fault," I said, taking her hand. "You did the right thing. The one who is wrong is the person who let hatred cloud his judgment." That night, I stayed at my mother's house, but sleep was impossible. The image of my uncle and my mother's story haunted me. I couldn't accept such a simple explanation. My business instincts told me that behind every irrational act, there is a rational motive of self-interest, one that is often far greater than emotion. Uncle David didn't just want revenge. He wanted something else. But what? The next morning, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find the answers myself. I didn't tell my mother. She had been through enough. I told her I needed to meet with my lawyer about the divorce. But my destination wasn't a law office. I went to find Mark, Mike's close associate, the man with the zoning maps. He was a critical link. If Uncle David was the mastermind, Mark was the executor. I needed to understand their true relationship. I didn't make an appointment. I wanted the element of surprise. I got his address from a friend in the real estate industry. It was a luxurious villa in a new gated community. I rang the bell. A housekeeper answered. I lied, saying I was a business partner of Mr. Mark's and needed to see him urgently. My professional appearance must have been convincing because she showed me into the living room without question. The house was lavishly decorated, proof that its owner was no ordinary public servant. A few minutes later, Mark came down the stairs. He looked surprised to see me but quickly masked it with a polite smile. Hello. Can I help you? Hello, Mark. I stood up, my own smile cold. I think we have a lot to talk about. Or perhaps I should say, partners of Mike and David. The smile on Mark's face froze. His expression shifted from surprise to panic, then to anger. Who are you? What are you talking about? I'm Sarah, I said, my voice clear and steady. Mike's wife, and David's niece. I think that's clear enough, don't you? Mark took a step back, grabbing the back of a chair for support. He clearly hadn't anticipated this. He stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. I have nothing to do with your family's problems. Nothing to do? I scoffed. So, I suppose the detailed zoning maps for the Northgate development that you leaked to Mike have nothing to do with you? Or the secret meetings you had with my uncle to discuss your plans, were those just random coincidences? Every word was a dagger twisting in his conscience. His face went pale, and sweat began to form on his forehead. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I had him. What do you want? He asked, his voice trembling, all his earlier confidence gone. I don't want anything, I replied, my voice like ice. I just want the truth. Why are you all doing this? Is it for money, or is there another reason? Mark was silent, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. Mark, my voice sharpened, you should know that I have enough evidence in my hands to ruin you. Leaking state secrets, aiding and abetting fraud. Those charges are enough to put you in prison for a very long time. You have two choices. 1, you tell me the entire truth, and I might reconsider. 2, you stay silent, and tomorrow morning, all of this evidence will be on an investigator's desk. My threat worked. Mark collapsed into the chair, his body limp. He knew he was trapped. After a long silence, he looked up, his eyes filled with despair. Okay, I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. And then Mark began his story. A story far darker and more complex than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about my uncle's hatred. It was about a network of cronyism, a conspiracy hatched by powerful people, and in that story, my land and I were just pawns. But the most horrifying revelation was Mike's true role in this entire drama. He wasn't a tool, a man being used as I had thought. He had been part of the conspiracy from the very beginning. And his reason for approaching me, for marrying me, it was never just about money. The air in Mark's opulent living room grew thick and suffocating. I sat perfectly still, bracing myself for a truth I knew would be devastating. Mark let out a long, ragged breath, his face haggard. He began to speak, his voice a flat, soulless monotone, as if recounting someone else's story. It's not as simple as you think, Mark said, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Your Uncle David's grudge, that's just a pretext, a cover story. It's true he resents your mother, but what he wants is much more than revenge. Then what does he want? I pressed. He wants your land, Mark replied. But not for himself. He's just one link in a much larger chain. There's a group of investors who knew about the rezoning plans long ago. They want to acquire that entire area for pennies on the dollar before the project is officially announced. But they had a problem. The largest and most valuable parcel of land belonged to you, and they knew you weren't the type to easily sell a family inheritance. Mark's words were like puzzle pieces, slowly forming a monstrous picture. So they went to my uncle. I finished for him, my mind working with a cold, terrifying clarity. They exploited his old grudge, promised him a huge cut of the profits, and turned him into their pawn to get close to his own niece and destroy her. Exactly, Mark nodded. Their initial plan was to use your uncle to create conflict, to wear you down and make you frustrated enough to sell, but they underestimated your resilience. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. My resilience. So my own strength had forced them to change their plan, and their next move was Mike. And Mike? I asked, my voice trembling at the name. When did he get involved in all this? Mark was silent for a long moment, looking at me with something resembling pity. Mike wasn't a tool, Sarah. He was part of the plan from the very beginning. I felt a jolt, as if I'd been electrocuted. From the beginning? What do you mean? Your meeting with Mike was no accident, Mark said, delivering the final, crushing blow. It was arranged by your uncle. He did a thorough background check on Mike, handsome, smooth-talking, but drowning in gambling debt. He approached Mike, promised to clear all his debts and give him a life of luxury. On one condition: Mike had to get close to you, seduce you, and marry you. I couldn't breathe. The world went dark around me. Our fateful meeting, the whirlwind romance, the vows and promises, it was all an elaborate, meticulously staged performance. I had fallen in love with an actor, a man hired to deceive me. What was their goal? I whispered, my voice hoarse. Why go to such lengths? Because they needed someone who could get deep inside your life, someone who could earn your absolute trust, someone who could make you willingly sign over that land without an ounce of suspicion, Mark explained. Mike was their trump card. His mission was to be the perfect husband, to patiently wait for the right moment. The plan to have you sell the land to save him from bankruptcy was supposed to be the final act. I laughed, a wild, broken sound that echoed in the lavish room, a laugh filled with tears, tears for my own stupidity, for 8 years of my life wasted on a lie, tears for a love that never existed. So, I was never loved. I was a business transaction, a target. This pain was worse than betrayal. It was the complete negation of my humanity, of my feelings. I understand now, I said, finally grasping the whole truth. My uncle's grudge, Mike's greed, the calculations of the powerful men behind them, it all wove together to create an invisible net. And I had flown right into it from day one. Why? I asked Mark, trying to regain the last shred of my composure. Why are you telling me all this? Because I was a pawn too, Mark replied, his voice filled with bitterness. They lied to me. They promised me a share of the profits. But after I leaked the information, they found a way to cut me out. I know that if this all comes out, I'll be the first one they sacrifice. I don't want to go down alone. And I know you, only you, are strong enough to take them down. He was right. I was no longer a heartbroken wife seeking personal justice. I was facing a war with a shadowy organization, a war I could not afford to lose. I stood up and wiped the tears from my face. The weakness was gone, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. I need evidence, I said, my voice sharp. I need the names of everyone behind this. I need a timeline of the meetings. I need everything you know. Mark looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I'll give it to you. I have a ledger where I recorded everything. Good, I said. Be ready. But don't think for a second that I'm letting you off the hook. You will also pay for what you've done. Leaving Mark's house, I felt like a different person. I wasn't Sarah, the betrayed wife. I was a warrior, preparing for the final battle. But one last question remained, a question only one person could answer. If Mike came into my life as part of a conspiracy, what role did Jessica, his mistress, play in this twisted drama? Was she part of the plan, or just another victim like me? Mark's confession was an earthquake that leveled my entire world. I used to think my enemies were just a cheating husband, a greedy mother-in-law, and a hateful uncle. But I was facing a network, a criminal organization hiding behind the masks of businessmen and officials. Mike, the husband I once loved, wasn't a lone wolf. He was a puppet whose strings were pulled from the very beginning. Returning to my mother's house, I didn't immediately tell her the whole story. I knew the shock would be too much for her. I just said I had found crucial new leads and needed time to process everything and devise a new plan. This was no longer a simple divorce case. It had become a fight against evil, a fight I had to win not just for myself, but to bring every last one of them to justice. But before the final battle, I needed to resolve one last piece of the puzzle, the question that kept nagging at me. Jessica. Who was she in this play? A clever accomplice, or just another victim fooled by Mike's charm? My gut told me her role wasn't simple. This time, I didn't call a lawyer or hire a private investigator. I decided to handle it myself. I needed a face-to-face conversation, a confrontation between two women who had been deceived by the same man. I got Jessica's number from Mike's old phone and sent her a short message from a burner phone. I know everything about your and Mike's plan. Meet me at the rooftop bar of the Skyline Hotel tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. I knew she would come. Her curiosity and her arrogance wouldn't let her ignore a challenge like that. That evening, I arrived early. I chose a table in a secluded corner, a spot where I could see everyone but remain inconspicuous. The city wind was cool and strong. I ordered a hot ginger tea, trying to keep my nerves steady. At precisely 8 o'clock, Jessica appeared. She was as stunning as she was in the photos, a vibrant red dress accentuating her pale skin and flawless figure. She scanned the bar, her eyes landing on me. A confident, challenging smile played on her lips as she walked over. "Hello," she said, pulling out a chair, her voice sweet but dripping with sarcasm. "I'm surprised you had the courage to see me." "I think you're the one who should be worried about courage," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. Jessica scoffed. "Courage? Why would I need that? Everything is going according to plan. Sooner or later, you'll be the one leaving with nothing. Oh wait, you'll be leaving with a mountain of debt." Her shamelessness made me clench my fists under the table. The plan? The plan to trick me into selling my land, steal my assets, and run away with Mike? You think I don't know? The smile vanished from Jessica's face. She froze, her eyes wide. How do you know that?" "I don't just know that," I sneered. "I also know about the group of investors behind you, about my uncle's role, and about the fact that Mike was hired to get close to me in the first place." With every secret I revealed, Jessica's face grew paler. Her initial confidence evaporated, replaced by panic and fear. She couldn't believe that the naive little lamb she and Mike had looked down on knew everything. "No, that's impossible," she stammered, her hands beginning to shake. "Nothing is impossible," I said, my voice sharp. "Your little show is over. But before the final curtain falls, I want to know one thing. What part did you play in this? A loving accomplice blinded by love? Or was it all just for the money?" Jessica fell silent, staring down at the table. After a long moment, she looked up, her eyes red. "Both," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I loved him. I really did. But I needed the money too." And then Jessica told me her story, another dark corner of the conspiracy. She came from a poor family and had always craved a life of luxury. She met Mike at a party, and his charm, his generosity, and his promises quickly ensnared her. "He told me he didn't love you," Jessica sobbed. "He said your marriage was just a business arrangement. He promised that as soon as this final deal was done, he would divorce you and give me a proper life, the life I've always dreamed of." "The final deal being my land," I stated. Jessica nodded. "Yes, but that wasn't all. He had a backup plan, in case you refused to sell." "What plan?" My heart tightened. Jessica hesitated, then, as if giving up completely, she revealed the final, most horrific truth. He had a fake medical file prepared to prove that you were mentally unstable, legally incompetent. He said if you didn't sign the papers willingly, he would use that file to have you committed to a psychiatric hospital. Then, as your legal husband, he would have full control over all your assets. I couldn't believe my ears. A cold dread washed over me. The man I had shared a bed with didn't just want my money, he wanted to destroy my life, to label me as insane and lock me away. His cruelty surpassed any human limit. This wasn't a con man. This was a demon. Why? Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because I was lied to too, Jessica replied bitterly. Yesterday I overheard him talking to your uncle. They were discussing how, after they got the money, they would not only abandon you but cut me out of the deal as well. I was just a tool, same as you. Once I was no longer useful, I would be thrown away. I understood. In the end, all of us, me, my mother-in-law, Mark, and even Jessica were just pawns on a chessboard controlled by my uncle and the powerful people behind him. They used our greed, our hatred, and our love to serve their own purposes. And now that the ship was sinking, the pawns were turning on each other. But was this where it ended? Was there another mastermind, someone even higher than my uncle, pulling all the strings from the shadows? The meeting with Jessica ended in a heavy silence. The wind howled around us, carrying away confessions and belated tears. Jessica left first, her small figure looking lonely against the glittering cityscape. I knew she had chosen her own path, a path of confession in exchange for a hope of leniency. I remained alone, trying to piece together a truth that was too monstrous to comprehend. A mastermind even higher than your uncle. Jessica's words echoed in my ears. She had overheard my uncle on the phone, referring to this other person not by name, but with a deferential title, Mr. Chairman. This chairman was the one who made the final decisions, the one who controlled the entire operation. My uncle, Mike, Mark, they were all just puppets. Mr. Chairman. The title was vague, but it was the only clue I had to bring down this entire evil network. I returned to my mother's house as dawn was breaking. She was waiting for me in the living room. She didn't ask where I had been, just looked at me with worried eyes. I told her everything Jessica had said, from the plan to have me committed to the existence of Mr. Chairman. As my mother listened, her face hardened. Her usual calm was gone, replaced by an expression of cold fury and determination. "That's enough," she said, her voice like steel. "I have been too lenient. They don't just want your money, they want to destroy your life. I will not let them." The next morning, my mother took me to see someone. Not a lawyer, but an old friend of my late father's, Mr. Henderson. He was a retired, high-ranking police official, but his influence and connections were still formidable. Sitting in Mr. Henderson's dignified study, I told my story one last time, from beginning to end, leaving out no detail. He listened patiently, his expression growing more solemn with every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, then looked directly at me. "Young lady, you have been incredibly brave. This is no longer a civil fraud case. This has all the markings of organized crime, operating with sophistication and the protection of people in power." He looked at my mother. "You were right to come to me. This needs to be brought into the light." And so, a quiet but relentless investigation began. With Mr. Henderson's help, we were no longer fighting alone. He connected us with a special task force that handled complex cases involving official corruption. Mark's ledger, the audio files from Jessica, and my detailed testimony became the cornerstones of their case. The battle had escalated. It was no longer just my fight, it was a fight for justice. Every move was made with secrecy and precision. On the task force's advice, I temporarily withdrew my divorce petition. I needed to maintain the status quo so as not to spook our targets. Meanwhile, Mike and his family, completely unaware that a legal net was closing in, continued their charade. They called and texted constantly, sometimes begging, sometimes threatening, demanding I divide our assets. Uncle David became more brazen, sending people to harass workers on my property, trying to pressure me into selling. But I was no longer afraid. I now had not only my mother but an entire team of professionals silently protecting me. Every action they took, every threat they made, was documented, becoming more evidence against them. And then, the day came. One morning, as my mother and I were having coffee in the garden, Mr. Henderson called. His voice was formal, but I could hear the satisfaction in it. It's done. The net has been pulled. That same morning, a series of coordinated arrests and raids were executed. My uncle was arrested in his office. Mike and Mark were arrested at their homes. Simultaneously, a figure no one had expected. Mr. Chairman, a man named Thompson, the president of a major real estate corporation, was brought in for questioning. It turned out he was the ultimate mastermind, pulling the strings in a massive scheme to acquire my land for a pittance to build an illegal development. The criminal network was completely dismantled. The truth was exposed. Every newspaper and television station ran the story, a shocking exposé on the criminals who wore the masks of businessmen and public officials. My name was in the headlines, not as a greedy wife, but as a key witness, a brave woman who dared to stand up against evil. The war was over, but I knew my life was just beginning. Sitting beside my mother, watching the morning sun dance on the leaves, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had weathered a hurricane, one that had swept away all the lies and deceit, leaving behind a clear blue sky, and I knew that from this day forward I would live a different life, a life that was truly my own. Perhaps the biggest surprise was not that the criminals were punished, but the letter my lawyer handed me after the final trial. A letter from Mike, written from his prison cell. He apologized, not for the scheme, but for the fact that he had, against all odds, and in spite of his mission, actually fallen in love with me along the way. I read the letter, folded it, and put it away. It didn't matter anymore. His love, whether real or fake, was a part of a past I was leaving behind. The future was mine to write.